All right, we are live. Talk about office hours. Danielle, you here? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. I'm sending you a message based off the message you just sent me.
Okay, cool.
All right. Give people a moment to get on. Just push this live on Instagram. And we are live on Facebook. That's
You gotta
awesome.
tag me on the Instagram one so that I can
Oh, I got you. I'll do it right now.
just on like when you do a reel or whatever, because then it'll let me share it. Otherwise, it doesn't.
Go share it now. You can reshare our story.
All right.
Awesome. I don't know if Cody will be here today or
He
not.
said that he will.
Always a wild card.
Said that he will be here. So.
I know this isn't Tugboat Office Hours topics, but my bunnies are alive, but one of them seems like it's on the edge.
Oh no.
Oh
no. We'll see.
There he is.
Cody Shaver.
Hi, you guys.
Hello.
Cameron was just telling us about his bunnies because he found some cottontails in his backyard.
Yeah, I saw them.
Yeah, I show everybody. They're the only thing that
matters in this world.
Yeah, keeps me going in this world of insurance claims some days is the two bunnies I'm rescuing.
I know the feeling, Cameron.
We all need purpose.
It's my most desperate ChatGPT chat is the one that's helping me keep them alive. This afternoon, I came home and one of them seemed like it was like breathing really shallow, wasn't taking food. I'm like, go into my ChatGPT bunny chat. I'm like, there's no options. I must keep it alive right now. What can I do? And it was like, give it some sugar water, make sure it's really warm, rub its chest. So we'll see.
That's what I need when I'm sick.
It's just
what
a little
coincidence.
All right, we can go ahead and get started. I don't have any documents prepared. I am going to read a LinkedIn post that I commented on this week. Cody, just based off of some of the conversations or leapfrogging off some of the conversations we had. We talked about this a couple weeks ago on here. We've all been talking about it internally a lot. But I want to continue the conversation around insurance adjusters, adjuster training, and adjusting guidelines, right? And I want to be able to kind of lay the groundwork for, I don't know, what we're talking about when we talk about an insurance policy, what we're talking about when we're talking about the role of an insurance adjuster, what are guidelines, what do they mean, and kind of go from there. So many of our conversations seem to circle around the same themes, which is fine. I think it shows that we're touching on something that feels really persistent across the industry, right? When we're talking about misaligned incentives and how those are going awry, we talk about training and the lack of training. There's all the different themes that seem to keep coming back up for us. So, I guess I'll throw this question, Cody, to you because I'll maybe frame it a little bit more in a legal framework. What is an insurance policy, Cody? When someone applies for home insurance, right? What is a home insurance policy? What are they getting when they sign something almost certainly electronically now? And ultimately, what does it mean to them?
Well, that's a good question. What is an insurance policy other than, it's theory, it's just peace of mind, right? That you're protected in case something happens, protection from the unknown. What a policy is a piece of paper, right? It's only as good as a promise. So in my true belief in doing this for 30 years, the insurance policy is a promise. Right? I don't know what answer you're looking for, but that's the answer I'm going to stick with.
Yeah, no, I like that. Insurance policies are promised, but give us like, I guess even like the technical legal answer, because I didn't know. What I'm wanting you to get into is like the fact that it's a contract essentially.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say the technical thing is it's a contract, which is an exchange of promises, right? The exchange of promises. The insured promises to pay premiums and cooperate if in case there's a loss. And the insurance company promises to indemnify the insured for any loss if it's a covered claim, right? And it goes beyond that. Then they promise to that they'll thoroughly investigate any issue that comes occurs with the property and indemnify it if it through that thorough investigation if it's covered under the policy.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Help people understand what a contract of adhesion means. I had never heard that phrase before I did my adjuster training, and it doesn't come up often enough. And I don't think like when it comes to disputes, but I think it's important.
Yeah, a contract of adhesion is a contract where one entity has all the terms. So if you and I enter into a contract and we're negotiating, I say, Cameron, I'm going to mow your lawn for $50, and you come back and say, that seems kind of high. Can you do it for 30? And I say, you know what? I'll do it every other Tuesday for, $45. And you say, hey, how about, every week, every once a month for 25, and we make a deal, right? We're negotiating the terms of a contract. We're mutually negotiating. A contract of adhesion is when one side has all the terms and the other party is, has no say so in the terms. It's a take it or leave it type agreement.
Yeah. Take it or leave it agreement. That's good way to put it. Essentially what you're saying is it means that one party writes the contract, and they both end up signing the contract, right? And the legal implications I remember learning even as part of my adjuster training, right? I'm not an attorney, never went to law school, but in my independent adjuster licensing training that I took, it talked about that functionally what a contract of adhesion means is that when there is a dispute, a legal dispute that is, falls into some type of gray area or is vague, or the terms in the contract aren't explicit, right? Then it's supposed to, the dispute should land in favor of, in this case, the insured, the person signing the contract that didn't get to write any of the terms, right?
Yeah.
So can you dive into like what that, functionally means? Is that upheld? And I guess that's the second question. Like, what does that mean in dispute? What's it supposed to mean? And is that ultimately upheld when it comes to the courts?
Yeah. So in any contract of adhesion, any ambiguities in the policy or the contract are going to go in favor of the non-drafting party. Okay. So an ambiguity is a term that could have multiple meanings. So the first place they're going to go is, does this term have multiple meanings? And if true, what are they?
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to go to always going to go to the plain meaning of the term and what that means. So you can go to the dictionary and see exactly what that means. And the term investigate, thorough, any term, right? You're going to go to the dictionary and see what that means, unless the contract specifies that it's a technical term used in that particular industry, right? Or or the contract defines it itself. Other than that, you're always going to go with what we call the plain meaning of the term, and that would be how you resolve an ambiguity. So, if something is questionable, saying, well, this could mean that it's covered, or this could mean that it's not, they're just going to go, and courts are just going to go to the dictionary and determine what it means. You can use, other evidence, to bring in to show what it means in an industry. You could bring in, how other insurance companies interpret a certain term, how it's been used in the industry, any kind of documentation, marketing material. You can use some of that. You can ask the courts to let it in to get a better understanding of what a certain term means in that particular instance. Say the word appraisal, right? Every time you talk about appraisal, some real estate guy is going to go up and say, yeah, I got an appraisal done on the house, which is just evaluation of the property and telling you basically what's wrong with the property and everything else. But in our industry, appraisal means something different. So that would be something where the plain meaning isn't going to define that term, right? So you need to go into what does that mean in that industry?
Yeah. My favorite example of what seems like an ambiguity is, I mean, it's we've probably talked about this specific language plenty of times here during office hours, but would be State Farm's water exclusion that uses the phrase a period of time, right? So in my opinion, the phrase a period of time, and if you aren't familiar, what it's referring to there is it's saying, you know, we do not cover water damage from a leak that has been ongoing for a period of time, is what State Farms says, which seems like a really, and then it doesn't go on to define what a period of time is, right? Other policies might say weeks, months, or years. Some explicitly say 14 days. Theirs is the only one I know of that just says this phrase, a period of time. And so, I don't know, in your understanding, like that one seems like a pretty clear, like, oh, this seems ambiguous, right? Because I can make an argument where I think I have made this argument to an adjuster before and said, like, hey, in literature, a period of time means a long time, oftentimes, right? Yeah. If they're going to say several days passed, they'll say several days. But if they're saying a period of time passed, it usually is jumping forward some amount of time that is longer than days and weeks, right? So if there is no literal meaning of it, but in literature, then it would mean actually a longer time rather than a shorter time. They obviously don't care about my opinion on that, but legally, and your understanding in that language, how is that language held up in the disputes that have gone through the courts recently?
Well, I agree with you that, you know, to have a term like that, it should be an objectable term, not subjective, right? And everything is that term itself, I think, is subjective. And I don't know how accurate it is. I use this term in saying, look, if you only have 10 minutes to live, that's a very short period of time. If you were getting attacked by a dog for 10 minutes, that's a very long period of time, right? So it depends on the situation. To an insured, you know, I mean, they might say, yeah, this water was leaking. I came in, I couldn't get it to stop. I ran outside, and they're going to say, yeah, it was a period of time. But, you know, I've thought about this term a lot, and everything's a period of time, right? A nanosecond's a period of time. Everything that occurs is occurring over some period of time. So it's odd to me that a court would allow such a subjective term to be used in a policy, but it was upheld, right? There is case law on it, and the examples that they give and I think there's 3 examples that they give that are something to define something that the court determines as sudden versus over a period of time, and that is a dishwasher failing mid-cycle and flooding a kitchen, a water heater breaking and flooding out a room, and a toilet overflowing is something that they say is sudden. And anything else they're kind of saying is a period of time. And I mean, I've had a case where, you know, we're saying, hey, she went to bed, woke up the next morning, and the kitchen was flooded. And the court upheld that occurred over a period of time. And it was a pinhole leak. So they get kind of into the minutia of claiming that it was a pinhole leak, which is, to me, that's just kind of an ambiguous term. What is a pinhole leak, right? Pinhole leak is, it could be up to I think they say a 1/16 of an inch, right? A pinhole leak. That's a pretty big leak. That's a big leak. So there's lots of terms, but to answer your question, the courts somehow, some way determined that a period of time is not an ambiguous term. And I don't understand it. Because when that language came out, I think myself and other attorneys all thought, well, we can argue that. That's very subjective, right? And the insured can interpret it one way, and it's an ambiguous term. It can be interpreted by the insured one way, the insurance company the other. But we lost that fight in a case, so it's now law. But they only give 3 examples, so which are the 3 that I provided.
State Farm gave those 3 examples during that case?
No, the court actually gave those examples. The Court of Appeals gave those examples of what a sudden and accidental issue would be. But I had a case where if you look at the language in the policy, it says I don't even know if it says over a period of time anymore. Have you looked at the policies lately for that water exclusion? Does it still say over a period of time? I've seen policies just say we don't we don't cover a continuous or repeated leakage and seepage. That's it, period. So
I
what is
I haven't seen it without that language in it, but
but
Yeah.
what is that, right? What is
I'm
a continuous or repeated leakage and seepage? If you look up the term continuous, right, it just means ongoing, right?
Mhm.
Ongoing. So without a breaking point. Well, that's kind of ambiguous. What does that mean? Every leak. If my pipe breaks in half and sprays, gallons of water, it's a continuous issue. I mean, leakage is pretty defined, right? Leaking and same with seepage. But
It still
says what?
It
Says a
still
period
says
of
it.
time.
Seepage or leakage of water, steam, or sewage that occurs or develops over a period
Yeah.
of time.
So the case that I had is the judge looked at that. If you have it up, Rachel, look. What does it say into the preamble and before the enumerated exclusions say? What is it? We don't cover any of the following, regardless if it's isolated, widespread. Doesn't it say that right there at the preamble before those exclusions?
We will not pay for any loss to the property described in coverage A that is caused by one or more of the items below, regardless of whether the loss occurs abruptly or gradually, involves isolated or widespread damage, arises from natural or external forces, or occurs as a result of any combination of these.
Okay, so what is a continuous leakage of water that occurs, even if it occurs abruptly, according to what she just read, occurs abruptly and is widespread, it's still not covered. And that was my big argument, saying, well, you have to determine if it's continuous repeated leakage and seepage first, right? Is it a continuous repeated leakage and seepage? And then you go back and say, okay, well, where does this language that Rachel just read into it? But according to the court, because we won that argument, we got them to take it under and say, hey, this is we're not looking at wear and tear. The whole premise was we don't cover for wear and tear. We're like, well, this isn't a wear and tear issue. This isn't a suing loss issue.
Mhm.
And we're not looking at the cause of loss. We're looking at the suing damages, and we're arguing that those are sudden. And they came back and said that we were right. That there's no evidence that this was ongoing. However, this exclusion clearly says that they don't cover continuous repeated leakage and seepage, even if it occurs abruptly. So since it was a pinhole leak, and it happened, even though it happened abruptly and was widespread, it still wasn't covered because it was a pinhole leak, and that was a continuous leakage of water.
Mhm.
Going off that ruling, they don't have to cover any water. So
No, yeah, and I don't want to get too deep into, because I'm still formulating some of my thoughts. I want to do some one of our. I'm trying to write a blog post essentially about this, but I think I mentioned it to you, Cody, before, where what it feels like with some of these carriers, and certainly not all of them, but where some of them are trying to get to functionally with their policies, like water damage here, as you're talking about with State Farm, is the ability to just pick and choose what they want to cover when they want to. And so like the policy functionally says almost nothing about what's covered. And then they can decide, on a case by case basis, if they feel like covering it based on their guidelines or whatever they want to use at that point. So, I mean, you're saying that the court essentially determined before what was water damage or what constituted that type of leak. And they said, was it dishwasher?
water heater, toilet overflow.
So those are the examples that they used. State Farm, I think, internally wants to be able to do something like that on their own, right? Have a set of guidelines that says these are the few things that we cover and not have to have it in the policy. But so back to the kind of initial question. So your answer is essentially like an insurance policy is a contract. It's a contract of adhesion. That's what we just talked about, right? Meaning the insurance company wrote all the terms. You're signing on to their terms. You have some responsibilities like paying a premium, reporting things on time. You have to uphold your end of that bargain, and then they have to uphold whatever else is in the policy, right? So that's the insurance policy that everyone signs. It's this contract, right? And so I know it seems like we're doing some basic overview here, but I needed this. I didn't know any of this when I went to adjust my first claims. I didn't know any of the things that we just talked about, not a single one. So
when we tried to adjust our first claim, we didn't even know what crown molding was.
no, I didn't know. I could be
To a house with you and pretending like you were my boss and asking you like, what is this?
Yeah.
So,
Chris, I'll throw the next question to you. And that is, what is And now with all your experience, you know, the better part of a decade, you and I have been adjusters now of one sort or another. Cody just talked about what an insurance policy is. What's the role of an insurance adjuster? One that's working for the insurance company.
The role legally of an insurance adjuster is to adjust the claim, and the definition of adjust is to investigate the claim, come up with a value of a loss, and to look for coverage, to investigate, to find coverage. That is the technical job of an insurance adjuster, to find coverage. Functionally, what an insurance adjuster is someone who is incentivized by an insurance company for all kinds of their own individual reasons to make money. and that's what most adjusters are, and that's what we were. We were just there figuring it was a job. And so they functionally are the not there to help you, but help the interest of the insurance company under the guise of helping you a little bit.
Yeah, super helpful.
I mean, that's not to remodel, like they're going to get adjusters that watch this. Like, I was an adjuster. I have friends that are adjusters. I have nothing against adjusters as a whole. The culture that is promoted by the companies is that type of culture, but individual adjusters can be awesome. So
yeah, for sure. A little bit of a side note, but since you brought up like the opinions that come up often when we talk about adjusters or the industry, essentially, there are a lot of people. If I post something like this on LinkedIn or somewhere like that, that'll come and say, I am not this type of adjuster. I've never done anything like this. And I think they're like, by and large, being honest, they're not misrepresenting themselves. And I think, and I've explained this to some people before, I'm like, if you're the type of adjuster that's passionate enough about the role that you're on LinkedIn talking about how passionate you are about the role, you're in the top 3%. All right. Like, just that fact alone, because the vast majority of people that do that job, it is, and again, I say this as someone who jumped into it for the money, essentially, initially is why I started doing it. And I did become passionate about the job. But the vast majority of people that are doing that job aren't passionate about it in the way that you are, most likely, if you're online talking about it and advocating for it and trying to learn more about it and all those different aspects of it. So I think that alone puts you in a realm that's unique.
We dealt with that when Rachel came over here, is that she didn't understand. She's like, she thought everyone was an adjuster like her, and Rachel is a fabulous adjuster that is there to get your claim paid. And so when she came and worked on our side, it was like the audacity these people have. She had no idea that there was other adjusters out there.
Rachel, talk about it. Cody, I have a question for you, but about the role of an adjuster in a second. But Rachel, you've worked for some of the larger insurance companies as an independent adjuster. Talk about, I don't know, how the role was, like, why did you become an adjuster, first of all? And how was the role defined and kind of presented to you and trained for you as you worked for some of those larger insurance companies?
So I started adjusting because I like to help people. And that's the real answer. Not medical is just not my jam anymore. I used to be in healthcare anymore. I don't want to touch people at all. So this is a way I can help someone that has been affected by a disaster. You know what I mean? Without like putting a bandage on them. I can help them do this, recover. And so I started, I did the Adjuster Pro class, and I had my license for about a year. And I finally, Hurricane Laura hit, and I was like, okay, I guess do that. I'll do that deal now. We're good. Well, I got on a roster for, I think every roster for every independent adjusting firm. And I finally got a call, and I worked for a big carrier for this firm. I'm not. And the training I got was smile and dial. That was it. It was about
into it because you were a good person. Like you got into it because you wanted to help people. Like that was
Oh,
like the impetus. Like you need a job and you like to help people, and the closest thing to healthcare was something like this.
Yeah. And look, I didn't even need a job at the time. I was just bored. My kids I went from homeschooling
Better,
to
the
my
best
kids being in
adjustment.
school. So I was like, what am I going to do? I got to do something.
Do-gooder. That's what we need in the adjusting world. Board
Yeah.
do-gooders.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, I think everybody, there's different reasons that people have jobs, you know, like for me, I didn't need like I said, I didn't need a job. I didn't, my husband didn't really want me to go back to work yet. He wasn't ready for it. So, but I was ready to get out of the house and I just wanted to help. And there was a huge need. I mean, Hurricane Laura was massive.
Yeah.
Lake Charles, you know, there was just so many people affected by that storm. So, so my training by the independent adjusting firm for the carrier was smile and dial. Those are literally my first instructions. I had this queue of claims, probably 25 that had never been, I had to do the first contact and reach out to them. And this is of course desk. I'd not done field. So I'm calling and saying, hey, how are you? What's going on? I hear you've got a tree on your fence. Okay. So we're going to write an estimate. I'll call you back in 3 days and we'll get you taken care of. And I just had to go through, that was it. And then so I got done with all my calls and they were, I mean, almost all of them were tree on a fence. I mean, it was so simple. It was actually really good. It was a great little training module for myself. I became really good at writing trees on fences. And so at the end of that shift, I said, okay, I've got all these people, all these estimates I have to write. And my manager said, we'll write the estimate. I said, how? Well, I don't understand. Like I nobody's taught me how to do this. And they was like, well, here, you put a tree, you put the fence and you put it in Xactimate and you're done. And I just sat there like, what have I done to myself?
Xactimate's a magic program. You just have to write
tree
and fence, and then it does the rest of the work for you.
Yeah.
So Rachel, as you started that role, large insurance company, no background, so you saw your role coming in as I'm here to help people essentially, right? Beyond that, did you like conceptualize what your job was beyond that? Like, oh, my role, like me as an adjuster, this is what I'm here to do. Did you have an idea of what that was or what it should be essentially at that point?
Well, I did do research before. I mean, that's kind of how I am. So I did learn a little bit about Xactimate before. I watched every Xactimate video I could find on YouTube before I ever even put myself on a roster.
Mm-hmm.
I read everything I possibly could get my hands on about building materials. Yeah. So I did have an idea, but I also worked with people who had no clue. They didn't even know. I mean, awful. Mm-hmm. So where I was scared and had no instruction, at least I had some idea that I'm going to write an estimate. I didn't know I'd be paying. I didn't know I'd be talking to people all the time. There's nothing that can prepare you for that.
Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah.
Super interesting to hear our different perspectives. Ours, I would say for Chris and I, was just like, we started in a state of panic. It was, here's 70 phone numbers. You need to show up at all their houses within the next 10 days. Yeah. And it was like,
school was a podcast in the airplane on the way over about what an adjuster is. I'm like, I thought it was a scam the whole time. I'm like, we're getting scammed here.
But anyways, yeah, I think the way we conceptualize it is interesting. Cody, so I'm going to throw it back to you for a second. When you think about the role of an adjuster, we talked about what an insurance policy is, what the contract is, how that function. Understanding what that is now for people, they say now they know what an insurance contract is. Oh, it's this policy. We both agreed to these terms. I have to do this. You have to pay this in this instance. What's the adjuster's role within that legally?
The adjuster's role legally is as it pertains to the policy
as it pertains to that contract
is to seek coverage the most simple elementary thing is an adjuster's role is to investigate thoroughly and seek any possible basis for coverage that they can find. That's the job of an adjuster. And then, of course, like Chris said, is to evaluate and adjust and price, right?
Mhm.
Determine the scope and value of the loss. But before you even get to the scope and value, you need to determine if there's coverage. And that part is seeking any possible basis that coverage may apply.
Mhm.
One thing that I want to ask, and I want to jump back a second if you don't mind, Cameron.
Yeah, of course.
You guys talked about being on the carrier side, the independent side, and which is essentially the carrier side, correct? And how your training was. And Rachel, you had training. Danielle started out on the PA side. Danielle, what was your training?
I was just going to get into the PA side of it in a second.
Let's wait.
We
But
do wait.
No, that's great. That's great. It's a good segue because I have some stuff to say about it as well too. Because some
Well-
interesting thoughts. But yeah, I think it's an important one to cover as well.
Well, I just want to say, Daniel, I've known you for a long time. I know what your training was. You went out with Kevin. You had on-site. I went out on a few jobs with you and she walked jobs with you. I mean, and you were trained from day one until at least when I left, when we were working together. So anyways, I wanted you to kind of explain how thorough your training was for a little PA company that I think had maybe 4 employees at the time. I mean, it was you, Kevin, maybe a couple other people, right? I mean, maybe then they had 2 other adjusters as well.
Yeah.
But well, Steve was there back then, right?
Yeah, when I first started, Steve was there probably for only a couple months, and then he left. So it was 2 owners, and then Steve left. Kevin took over the company. But I did get like hands-on training. I went on inspections with them. Before I ever adjusted my own claim, I think I got probably a good year.
I was going to say it was
if
over
not
a year.
more.
It was
Yeah.
over a year that you were training before they let you handle a claim.
Yeah.
And then Rachel on the other side is working for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, got a little module in her own research and said, write an estimate, right? And I know that I went on one of your first jobs with you, and that was well over a year after you had been working there. So
Yeah, absolutely.
all right.
Yeah, so the training is a huge difference. I didn't realize that it was just with insurance companies, you're just thrown in there and you're like, okay, figure it out.
Doesn't it all make sense now that you know that though? When some of the people that you meet, you're like,
Oh,
oh,
absolutely.
that's what happened.
Yeah. Oh, so you haven't been trained is the issue. And I think it's funny that Cody says it's the adjuster's job to find coverage, because it almost seems like they do the opposite as well. I'm sure all of you know that. But yeah, they always try to find a reason to deny the claim first, before they afford coverage. But
Yeah, I'm going to find, I was actually, while you guys were talking about this, when Cody said that, it popped into my mind a post from Stephen Badger that I commented on, and I'm going to find it here in a little bit because it was precisely about that. And let me see.
There was while you're looking for that real quick, there was an amazing adjuster that worked at Allstate. His name was David. I had utmost respect for this guy, war hero, everything, amazing guy. And he had been doing it for over, I think, 20 years when I met him. And he had told me, Cody, I have only fully denied maybe 15 claims my entire career. I can always find coverage somewhere, something. And the adjusters took such pride in being able to manipulate to find some kind of coverage to help people out. And it just, you don't see that level of, investigation nowadays.
I don't think people have the authority to be that generous anymore either. I'll share my own story a little bit on the public adjusting side in that. So I received very little training as an independent adjuster. This is Hurricane Harvey 2017. Same as Chris. We told that story a lot of times. But becoming a public adjuster, so my story also wasn't like Danielle's on the public adjusting side. The PA firm I worked for was larger, really well established, one of the longest standing ones in California. And I got hired mostly because my background was in independent adjusting for several years. So they knew I knew how to write an estimate. I had experience in the industry. So when I got hired at a PA firm, there was someone that was leaving the firm at the same time. And I literally, on my first day, I walked in and they handed me all of his files. There were 60 to 70 of them in the conference room, and they just set them all on the table. And they're like, these are a mess. Can you start working on them? And I just sat there for a few days and just called every single one, tried to figure out where they were. They had been really poorly handled previously, it seemed like, and just started working my way down on that. But I will say this too, because I think there is a parallel that I don't know if we've ever talked about and probably should. There is like when we talk about independent adjusters or staff adjusters or desk adjusters, whatever it might be, that are, I don't know, choose your word, lazy, not thorough, rude, oftentimes and untrained, all these things that we can get frustrated about when it comes to the way that an adjuster might be treating an insured, and the way that they're handling that position and that responsibility. I think there's there's an equivalent on the public adjusting side that's pretty prevalent as well. And one that I realized once I entered the field is there are plenty of public adjusters that sign claims and do very little work on them, but take a fee, right? So it's a very different type of unethical behavior, but it's essentially like the role of a public adjuster is to advocate for you. The contract says it all. I'm going to present this claim to your insurance company, negotiate it on your behalf. I'm going to do inspections, evaluations, all this different stuff. There are plenty of public adjusters that sign a contract for 10% to 25% of a claim and then just wait for the insurance company to adjust the claim and take their fee and walk away, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are, I think that is a relevant equivalent that is by no means like there's a large number of public adjusters that likely function that way. I've met some, I had to fix the files of some clearly that were being handled that way when I first started. So I do think that no matter where you are in our industry, it requires a high level of intentionality and integrity to try to function at that high level of that the calling, the responsibility that you need to uphold to do the job really well. Right. And I think because the barrier to entry is so low to become an adjuster and to become a public adjuster, right? Like you need maybe you need a high school diploma in some states, but like you don't need any type of degree. You don't need any type of certification before trying to get your adjuster's license, which is a 40-hour training for most states that you can get through really quickly, pass the test, and you're an adjuster now, right? And you're now able to handle that contract that we talked about earlier. On the public adjusting side, it's only a little bit different in California. You need to have 2 years experience or do a 1-year apprenticeship, which is not overseen by the Department of Insurance, right? So who knows what that training over that year is going to be like? Are you just going to be answering phone calls, or are you going to be trained to write estimates and evaluate policies, all those different things? And so, yeah, I think no matter where, like I said, no matter where you end up in this industry, you have to land there with some integrity and take on the responsibility to do a good job. To your point that you made a little bit earlier, Cody, you made the point where an adjuster's job, you essentially said primarily adjuster's job is to find coverage that exists within the policy. All right, that's the idealistic way of saying it. There's a post from Stephen Badger that I actually kind of appreciated him saying this explicitly. I'm just going to find the portion here. I found the post. So he's talking about, he has this theme in some of his posts where he talks about that the roofing industry has essentially killed its golden goose by being so heavy-handed and chasing hail claims and things like that. And so it's a really good industry to be a restoration contractor, a roofing contractor. It's a great job. Why do you have to overdo it and go chase down all these claims and overbill them? Valid point if and where it's happening, right? You don't want people filing claims unnecessarily. But anyways, he makes this whole post that outlines that it's the job of the insured to present coverage essentially to the insurance company and to make their argument for coverage. And there was case law that he's talking about here. I'm just going to read this really fast. So I'll go through it as quick as I can because I think it's interesting. He talks about reading Chip Merlin's blog. and he read a court decision. I encourage everyone to read the decision. If you do, you'll clearly understand why the court reached the decision that it did. The claim was clearly grossly inflated and wholly unsupported by the public adjuster hired by the insured. The court saw right through it, and correctly held that the insured failed to comply with its burdens under the policy. One such burden is to provide prompt notice by submitting all of its damage components during the initial claim process. They didn't do that. Only the dwelling claim was submitted during the claim process. The contents and lost rents were first submitted long thereafter. Another burden is submitting both the ACV and RCV damage measures. They didn't do that either, ever. Even at trial, they only submitted the RCV measure. So there was no evidence of the ACV measure, which until the costs were incurred was the insurer's only payment obligation. Hence, there should have been a direct verdict for the insurer. What's the real lesson of this case? Bad cases make bad law. He talks about Ashut and Char cases that did the same thing, that the one we talk about in California. Likewise, this abusive hurricane claim in Florida has now created bad law for Florida policyholders. In both of these matters, the courts could clearly see the abusive nature of the lawsuits, grossly inflated claims, not based on actual damages or policy coverage, with alleged damages that had not been repaired. And accordingly, in both cases, the courts ruled against the insureds. So what this bad law is that it's requiring prompt notice of loss for all claim components in Florida, meaning immediately, I can't remember what the timeline is, but you have to present essentially the full claim up front. What are you asking for across all the coverages? And if you don't, your claim can be denied because you did not uphold your end of the policy. And he talks about this as a case of public adjusters killing their golden goose. And the comment I made to him is like, it actually is kind of the opposite. Now, Florida public adjusters have all the more motivation or ammunition to get people to sign with them, because they can now rightfully tell people, hey, if you don't know how to document your claim immediately, the whole thing can be turned upside down. So unless you're an expert, you need to hire one now, because if you don't present this entire claim, then you're going to be in trouble. And if someone doesn't know how to do that, and so, but is a lot of people's underneath it, even some independent, and there's a lot of disagreement with this across the industry. Cody, you were talking about like the role of an adjuster is to find coverage. If you were to post that in one of the Facebook groups with adjusters, there would be a huge argument as to whether or not that's their role. They'd be like, that's not my role. I just go in and I write for damage. It's not my job to find coverage at all. That's the insured's job is to present coverage. I don't have to advocate for it in any way. And then other people like a Rachel will be like, absolutely, it's my job to find coverage. That's why I'm here. My job is to look at this policy and try to find coverage. And one of the points I made in my response there was like, at least like he made it explicitly clear that he, as one of the larger insurance carrier attorneys, is saying like it is the homeowner's job to go out and find coverage and present it to the insurance company, which is, I think, not true. But understanding that dynamic, especially for people that use Tugboat, to know that your insurance adjuster from your insurance company likely doesn't see that as their job. It is most likely that they don't see it as their job to come in and advocate for you or find coverage, that you now need to present your claim really well to them. And having that perspective is more and more important as time goes on. Okay.
Well, different motives too is often they get paid the same amount for less work if they denied a claim or write an estimate lower. Like they can spend an extra half an hour writing an estimate, or they can not and get paid the same amount. Yeah,
absolutely. So we've talked about what the insurance policy is. We talked about what an adjuster is essentially, right? And Cody, you simplified it. Like the role of an adjuster should be to come in. You have this whole policy that outlines what coverage should be. you have damage to your house. Let me do everything I can to see if this damage fits into this coverage that's afforded to you within the policy. That's the idealistic way of looking at it.
Yeah, real quick on that. So there's actually a holding on it, and an adjuster's job is to thoroughly investigate a claim, right? That's part of the duty, is to thoroughly investigate. And what does that mean? It means it is essential for an insurer to fully inquire into any possible basis that might support the insured's claim.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. Like, even on the functional side of this, there's a claim that I was the public adjuster on. It was a fire claim, a smaller one. I was helping the shop owner where everything had burned. He was underinsured, so we had signed it at, I think, almost nothing, essentially, just to help him get his claim presented. And he had all these little ancillary lines of coverage for things like the signs and important documents, and like these little like $1,500 for this that you can get and $2,000 for this. And I asked the adjuster early on, I said, hey, are you going to address all these other endorsements and lines of coverage that are within this policy? And his answer was like, oh, well, if he wants to present it to me, then we'll take a look at it. And it's like, oh, the whole place burned down. Like, you have all the photos. Just go find where those coverages apply. Like, they hit the limit, almost certainly all of them. Right. And any ones that you need extra documentation for, I was trying to like give it back to him. Like, hey, it's your job to adjust this claim. Like, you see coverages are here. Can you go see if they apply? And absolutely, like, would not do it. It was like, oh, no. Like, if you guys want that money, like, you got to present that claim.
And this is how they treat insureds who have no idea about anything.
Yeah.
And there's actually some ruling that said something like that insurance policies are so complicated that the ordinary insured wouldn't understand it anyways.
Yeah.
In regards to the duty to read, right? That they're very complex documents. And, but yeah, I mean, I understand them, throwing that back on you, basically like, hey, you're the PA, earn your money, right? But it's the insurers that don't have representation that don't know, right? And, yeah. So
That's why we're here.
That's why
Ted is here.
But how many people actually retain assistance out of every claim that's filed? How many people actually get help?
I wish we knew, but it's not that many. All right. So last point we can talk about is the dynamic that claims handling guidelines play within the adjusting process. And so I'll explain what they are. Anyone can take up the question that I ask afterwards. So claims handling guidelines is typically a document that's given to you as an adjuster working for an insurance company. You might be working through a third party. So you might be what's called an independent adjuster, which means you work for a company that was hired by the insurance company to adjust claims. Anyways, either way, Emily says Rachel is my girl. She's talking about Tugboat.
Yeah.
Emily is one of our faithful Tugboat users. She's awesome. Anyways, so the claims handling guidelines is the training documents that an insurance company provides to its adjusters that says, this is how I want you to adjust claims. And I was just reviewing some old ones this week in like 100 and something pages, and I scrolled through it pretty quickly. And the one thing that it was scant on, one was policy language, which was like very slim on policy language and what I should know about it. Almost like pretty much none of it was about how to find coverage, like this thing that we're talking about. How do you look for coverage in water, which is kind of what you would expect. If the role is to find coverage and you're going through training as an adjuster and you with whatever carrier it might be, the training you would think would look like, hey, this is what water damage might look like. This is what we want you to walk in and start looking for. This is what coverage opportunities are there. But instead, what was there is, here's the common reasons for most common reasons that come up for denying a claim. And they wanted you to memorize those ones. Here's the seepage exclusion. Here's the water backup endorsement. Even when it came to hail damage, it wasn't, this is what hail damage looks like. And this is how to really understand what is a blister, what is a hail strike, what is all this different stuff, what is hail damage on a asphalt shingle versus metal, and all this stuff. All it was fill out this sheet when you get on site. It will tell you whether or not you should replace this roof. And it was like just an Excel sheet with numbers and calculations built into it. And so it was a lot of things essentially like that. All that to say, claims handling guidelines aren't the policy. It's the training documents that you get given by the insurance company that says we want you to adjust claims in this manner, in this fashion, right? I guess I'll open it up to anybody here. Danielle, you're the only one here that didn't work for insurance companies at any time. So, but you can still speak to it because you've worked alongside insurance adjusters for long enough now that you've pushed up against guidelines. And it's funny how often people explicitly say, oh, the guidelines don't let me pay for that. And then we have to be like, oh, I don't care about your guidelines. Like, what does the policy say?
Yeah, actually, it's a perfect question because I just got not a new claim, but a recent claim that we signed. Obviously, the claim's not new. It's an Altadena wildfire claim. But the adjuster specifically told the insured about replacing their personal property. And she's like, oh, we don't do that. And the insured's like, what do you mean you don't do that? She's like, oh, yeah, we don't replace things if they're not cleaned first, you know? And this place came back like super high lead, you know, positive for lead all over the place. They have 2 young children. And the adjuster's like, well, we have to try and clean it first. And the insured's like, well, you could just replace these items, you know? And the adjuster's just like, oh, we don't do that. Like, apparently that's maybe part of their internal guidelines is that they just don't do that, you know, until it's attempted to be cleaned. But I'm sure all of you guys know, like, some of these items can be deemed a total loss regardless of, you know, being
Yeah, just
or not.
waste their policy limits. If they only have $150,000 and they spend $100,000 cleaning everything, then they can't replace. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything. Yeah.
Everyone else here, what have been some experiences that with you with insurance company guidelines, either bumping up against them as a public adjuster or when you were an adjuster? What was your experience with claim handling guidelines?
I'm curious, Cody, because you've been on both sides of it and you have to deal with a lot of the shenanigans that people say. Curious some of the stories you have around your adjusters using guidelines as an excuse.
Well, I mean, I think that guidelines are a great way to start and kind of give a basic understanding. There's 2 sets of guidelines, right? There's claims handling and then there's adjusting guidelines. So I don't know, Cameron and Chris, if you guys received both. Rachel, I'm sure you received both, right? There's 2 different types of guidelines.
I don't know. I think it was just one for me.
Yeah, they were just a document, and the document that they gave us for guidelines was much thicker than the document they gave us for how to read a policy.
Yeah, so reading the policy is part of the adjustment guidelines, and then there's, claims handling guidelines, and then the adjustment guidelines is how to write it up, right? The scope. So, yeah, I think that they're a great way to give basic understanding, but you know, guideline is just that. It's a guideline, right? It doesn't mean that that's the rule, and not every loss fits within a guideline. And I just think that people need to be a little bit more open to understand things. One thing that I run into a lot with guidelines is saying, well, we don't allow for that in the guidelines. And when those guidelines conflict with standards of construction, that's when I have an issue with it. And the problem is they don't look at it and say, oh, well, you're right, it does conflict, so we have to do it this way. According to the adjusters, the guidelines rule, right? Nothing else matters. You can come and say, well, the way that you're applying this guideline and this line item doesn't conform to the proper way according to the manufacturer of how to install their product. You know, a great way is grinding of a slab before you install flooring, right? They say, well, our guidelines, we don't allow for grinding of the floor. Okay, but the manufacturer says you have to grind the floor. You have to maintain the standard of construction. So a lot of the times you will see guidelines conflicting with standards of construction. And, you know, I always say this, when you have somebody that knows the rules and presents it, then go outside the guidelines and then keep your guidelines for claims that I'm not on. I care less, right? But when someone's calling you out and saying, well, that doesn't conform to the standards of construction for this particular product, according to the manufacturer. And so, you know, to the point where you're going, well, is the manufacturer wrong? Should we write them a letter and saying, hey, you don't know how to install your own product because the guidelines of this carrier says that you're wrong? So It gets to be that ridiculous.
They don't have the authority to make that decision. They just simply have to write within guidelines and then pass it up front.
Correct. Well, a lot of, you know what, but here's to springboard off of that. Yeah, adjusters write in accordance with the guidelines. They have zero authority to go outside the guidelines, right? Because what's going to happen, it's going to get reviewed by a reviewer, right? Some kind of quality control person. And what's going to happen, they're going to get dinged and they're going to get noticed. I don't know, Rachel, you probably saw some of those on your fence claims, right? And you're saying, well, this particular product needs to be installed this way. And then they're like, yeah, but that's not in the guidelines. And from my experience, they don't care. This is how we write it up.
Yeah.
But I don't even think that the adjusters have any authority to write it up. Like I have some claims where I'm trying to work with the adjuster and they have to send it to some third party or some reviewer team. They don't even have the authority to even address the scope anymore.
This is actually a really prescient point, I think, Cody, because I'm seeing the same thing, not just from independent adjusters like I was, right? Where it makes a little more sense because I'm a little detached from the insurance company, but I have staff adjusters, like large loss staff adjusters. This means they're well experienced. They know how to write estimates that will send in an estimate, no matter what the category might be. If it's just reconstruction, if it's abatement, if it's mitigation, the response more and more often for just about everything is, hey, we're going to go ahead and get a competitive bid. We're going to go ahead and get a competitive bid. And we have one right now where we sent in an estimate for abatement. This is on one that I'm a public adjuster on for abatement work that's agreed that it needs to get done. It's in accordance with the hygienist guidelines that are there. The adjuster doesn't argue that. But we didn't just send in that bid. We sent in 3 and said, hey, we're willing to go with the lowest out of these 3. It's this company. And the adjuster's like, okay, well, we got to get a competitive bid in there. I'm like, well, we have 2. Like, there's 2 competitive bids that you're already seeing. We're going with the cheapest one here. And the implications of the competitive bid, I mean, we can talk about this forever, and we've talked about it some, but I mean, we have a claim with State Farm where we specifically and purposefully used a vendor that's on their vendor program to give an opinion on flooring. And once he gave his opinion on flooring, State Farm said, you know, we're going to have to call in another expert. And we're like, why? Like, he is your expert on XYZ claims. Like, here are the claims that you sent him out on as the expert. And they're like, oh, well, we didn't send him on this one. You sent him. So we're going to send someone out that essentially we're paying. We're like, what are the implications of this? Like, you are acknowledging, it seems like, that when you pay someone to do the work, they're clearly going to do it differently than if the insured is paying them.
Well, because when they hire them, they're going to write it up per the guidelines.
Per the guidelines, this all comes back per the estimating guidelines. But I guess that's a good point too, is that estimating guidelines aren't just for adjusters nowadays. More and more often, because contractors are the ones that are doing all the inspections, they get their own estimating guidelines as well. I am friends with someone that was a supervisor for a contractor that was on a carrier program here in California. And he would tell me about the conversations that he would have with adjusters. They'd be like, hey, you need to take off this coat of paint that's in here. You were not going to pay for supervision. It's certainly not supervision. And he was a supervisor. He's like, that's my job. Like, I'm going. And it was like really reasonable. I was like, I go there twice a week for this long. This is what I do. And they're like, yeah, no, we're not going to pay for that and take all these different things off. And so like they're getting dictated, whether it's, you know, in a phone call or in an email by an adjuster, but also with estimating guidelines get sent to them. So it's not a contractor saying, hey, based on my licensing experience and all the work I've done building houses, this is how this one should get built. It's based on the same guidelines that us as adjusters were sent. This is how I'm going to write this estimate more and more often.
Yep. We've gotten to a place in the industry where the insurance companies are dictating the scope of work to the experts.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll finish up here. We are at a full hour. Just to recap the things that we talked about today, if you have just jumped on and seen it, you will keep this posted on the various platforms. But what we were talking about today is, what is an insurance policy? What is this contract that you're signing? What is that dynamic there? How should it be utilized? What's the role of an adjuster in interpreting, estimating, acting out that contract on behalf of the insurance company? And what's the role of the guidelines that adjuster is likely given in adjusting your claim? And so all of those things are topics that we talk about separately. Cody, I'm going to have you over soon so we can sit down and do a proper interview. I'm sure we'll cover some more of those as well and hear some more of your story about your time as an adjuster. So everyone keep their eyes open for that. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. And if you are watching this is Tugboat's office hours, and Tugboat Talk Claims is an online claim support tool. It's free for anyone that's been affected by a wildfire. We're likely going to have it be free for anyone affected by a catastrophe moving forward. And it's extremely affordable for anybody. And I highly encourage people to use it, if only for the reason that as you're going through a claim, it helps you have clarity around these things that we were talking about today. Because when you're going through a claim, so often you're confused and just frustrated because you're just like, what's going on here? Like, why is my adjuster doing this? Why are they saying this to me? And a lot of what we do at Tugboat is just help give some context to that. It's like, hey, like, here's some reasons why your adjuster may have done that. Right. And because you now understand that, here's some options for how you can respond. Right. And just having that little bit of education is the breath of fresh air that some people need to be like, okay, like at least I know what's going on here and I can react to it at this point. So anyways, that's what Tugboat does for people. We love doing it. We hope you guys use it. And we will see everyone next week for office hours, Wednesdays, 3:00. Thanks, everybody.